How's it, Steve? Looks like you're the first one here. Not sure if you can hear me yet.
Hi, Rabbi.
How are you, Stephen? Looks like you're the only one here today. Oh,
I doubt it.
Kent is here.
It's just that you
Kent.
you're
It's
very.
actually a nice short chapter today.
Oh, Kent's very smart. Kent, you're going to a job interview, Kent.
If I mute.
And not going for, I'm in the office, so that's, I guess, accordingly. It's like
beautiful.
You
Good to see you both.
You put us all to
Okay,
shame.
we get started. There is a recording available for those who either don't make it or are late, but I do want to get started. And it's a relatively short chapter, so it'll be about 15, 20 minutes max. Okay, so we continue with the laws of Pesulei Hamukdashim, those things that make sacrifices invalid. Today we're going to look at birds, and when things in the procedure go wrong, what is the result? So let's share the page, and just hold on, stop like that. Just mute so we don't get any feedback. And here we go. Okay, so it's chapter 7. And we begin as follows. He says, whoever is unacceptable to perform service in the temple, so that it's either a non-Kohen or a Kohen for whatever reason is not valid for the service, if they do the ritual of Melika, now you'll remember that Melika is the way in which a bird that is being brought as a sacrifice is slaughtered or killed, as opposed to Shchita. Shchita is done with a knife at the front of the neck. Melika is done at the back of the neck. With the fingernail of the Kohen. So interestingly enough, when it comes to shchita, we've learned that anybody can really shech the korban. It's the least critical part of the processing of an animal sacrifice. But when it comes to processing a bird sacrifice, the melika must be done by a Kohen valid for that service. So this is what the first point the Rambam is saying. Someone who's unacceptable to perform temple service, if they perform the rite of melika, the melika is unacceptable. Nevertheless, even though the dove killed by such a melika is unacceptable, it is not considered as a nevela. Nevela is the term that we use for an animal carcass or a bird carcass that died not by way of the correct ritual slaughtering. Then it has a certain level of tumah, of ritual impurity, that particular carcass. So what he's saying here is that although melika performed by someone who should not have been performing it is an invalid melika, and therefore that particular bird can no longer be continued to be processed as the sacrifice that it would have been intended for. But nevertheless, the carcass of that bird does not have the status of impurity of an avela, right? Of a kosher, so as he says, it's not considered as an avela of a kosher fowl with regard to the laws of ritual impurity. Similarly, if one performed melika at night, which is a time that you're not supposed to do it, or slaughtered an ordinary dove in the temple courtyard, or a consecrated dove outside the temple courtyard, they are not nevelot. Basically, these are different scenarios where the wrong activity was done to a particular bird. So a bird that was dedicated for the altar, that was shechted outside the Beit HaMikdash, or a bird that was dedicated for the altar but was shechted inside the Beit HaMikdash. So these are processes that are okay on the wrong type of bird, or the wrong bird for the wrong process. Things are mismatched. But each of these things are, in and of themselves, are valid. So the result will be that you can't eat a bird that was not holy, that was slaughtered inside the temple. But at the same time, it's not an avela. Okay, that's what these are the examples he's giving. And he'll give the qualification actually in a moment. So just continue with the second halacha. If one perform melika on turtle doves before they reach the appropriate age, or on young doves who pass the appropriate age, So you'll remember there's a very specific window of time when a young dove can be brought, or the turtle doves can be brought as an offering, and it has to be in that window. But if there's an in-between stage when it's not being offered, and you did malika to it, or a dove whose wing shriveled, whose eye was lost, whose leg was cut off, it's considered as an avela in all contexts. This is the general principle. Any disqualifying factor that takes place after a dove entered the temple courtyard disqualifies it, but does not render it an avela. But if the disqualifying factor did not take place after it was brought into the temple courtyard, meaning it's intrinsically not fit as a korban, then the dove is an avela in all contexts. So if everything was right, but the wrong person did it, then it's not an avela. But if it's fundamentally not appropriate to be brought as a korban, it's too old, it's too young, or it's got a type of invalidation on its body, then if the malika is performed on it, even though the process is correct, malika is the way you would prepare a bird, but because intrinsically it's a bird that is not fit for the purpose of a sacrifice, that would be considered an avela. Halacha 3. For this reason, when a person performs malika and the animal is discovered to be a treifa, so you found out that the bird intrinsically was not healthy. So what happened? Or he performed malika with a knife. So you did the process on the back of the neck instead of the front of the neck, but it was done with a knife. Or perform malika on an ordinary dove, meaning one that wasn't designated as a korban, but you did it in the temple courtyard. Or you did malika on a consecrated dove outside the temple courtyard. So in all these instances, they are considered as an avela, because then intrinsically what was happening was invalid. For malika permits and purifies only a dove that is acceptable to be offered on the altar, and a dove that is prepared outside of the courtyard cannot be offered up. So intrinsically it's not good, and therefore once it's now killed, even though it was in the way of malika, it is considered an avela. In contrast, if malika was performed on a dove that was this was sodomized or set aside for pagan sacrifice, worshipped, in other words, in idolatrous practice, or given to a prostitute as her fee, right? We've spoken about this previously, an esnan zona, or exchanged for a dog, or was a tumtum, or if this bird either had dual gender organs or neither. So although generally speaking, the bird, we weren't concerned whether it was female or male, we should be able to tell that it's one or the other. If you can't tell that it's one or the other, or it has both, that particular creature is invalid. So it's considered as an avela in all contexts, as he says, because again, these are further examples of something that is intrinsically unfit for the mizbeach, and therefore once it's killed, it's an avela. It causes a person's garments to become, and so now what's the practical ramification of an avela? So a bird, unlike other animals, does not transfer its impurity through lifting it or touching it. It does cause impurity when one swallows it. Now, of course, a person should not be eating this. It's an avela. It's not kosher. You're not allowed to eat it. But if you did, besides the fact that you've eaten something you weren't allowed to eat and you transgress that prohibition, you also cause yourself and your garments to become impure, ritually impure. So this is what it says. It causes a person's garment to become impure when it enters his gut. The rationale is that the holiness of a sacrifice does not fall upon them, and thus it is not considered as having been disqualified after entering the temple courtyard, which was the criteria that we spoke about earlier. If in other words, the first example was a non-kohen who does malika on a bird that otherwise was fine, it's not considered, you wouldn't process it further for the korban because it's unfit for that, but it's also not impure. But in these instances, it was never fit for purpose. It was never fit to be brought on the mizbeach, and therefore once it's killed, it's got the status of an avela, because it's not being killed in a kosher way. So it's an avela. Halacha 5. We already explained in Hilchos Maaser Korbanot that the blood from a sin offering. So now we're going to talk about whether there's a mix-up, which you can either have an ola bird or a chatat bird, but each one has its own very particular procedures. They're different in a number of ways, where the blood is sprayed, how the blood is sprayed, and also exactly how the malika is done. So we're going to talk about cases where you confuse the two. So we already explained in Hilchos Maaser Korbanos that the blood from a sin offering of a fowl is presented on the lower half of the mizbeach, and the blood of a burnt offering of a fowl So now, when the blood from a sin offering of flour is presented on the upper half of the altar, it's unacceptable because it should have been brought, you should have presented the blood at the bottom half of the altar. This applies whether the blood was presented in the manner of a sin offering or in the manner of a burnt offering, whether it was offered for the sake of a burnt offering or for the sake of a sin offering. So there's 3 points that need to be in sync when you're doing the offering the blood, right? There's a difference between the burnt offering and the sin offering. By the burnt offering, you'd sprinkle some of the blood and then you'd squeeze out blood. By the chatas, I hope I'm getting it right, you'd only squeeze. So this is what he's saying. As soon as you do it in the wrong place on the altar, so a chatas offering which should have been on the lower half, that you did on the top half, but even if everything else about it you did the same way as a chatas offering should be done, it's still invalid. Okay, and even if your intention was that you're bringing it as a chatas and as a chatas offering, it's still invalid. Halacha 6. Similarly, when the blood from a burnt offering of a fowl was presented on the lower half of the altar, and should have been on the top right, even if we form malika on one of the sides of a ritual slaughter, which is correct for the oila offering, on the lower half and the other side on the even if he performed the malika on one of the sides of the ritual slaughter on the lower half and the other side on the upper half, it's unacceptable. The whole thing has to be done in the right place. This applies whether the malika was performed in the manner of a burnt offering or in the manner of a sin offering. So again, just to make sure I got it correct, let's just read this note. In addition to the place on the altar where the blood of the two is offered, there are 2 differences between the way the malika is performed for a burnt offering and a sin offering. 1, the head of the dove must not be severed while performing malika on a sin offering, meaning you only cut one of the main sides, the food pipe or the windpipe, right? For the burnt offering, by contrast, there's an obligation that the head be separated, meaning you've got to cut through both of those pipes. Secondly, the blood of a burnt offering is squeezed out on the wall of the altar. The blood of a sin offering, by contrast, is sprinkled on the altar. So he's saying whether the malika is performed in the manner of a burnt offering or in the manner of a sin offering, whether it was offered for the sake of a sin offering or for the sake of a burnt offering, if the bird itself was designated as an oila and you did it in the wrong place, even if every other part of the procedure was correct, it's still invalid. Halacha 7. When malika was performed on a sin offering of a fowl on the lower half of the altar, in the manner as it should be performed for a burnt offering for the sake of a sin offering, as it should be performed for a sin offering for the sake of a burnt offering, or as it should be performed for a burnt offering for the sake of a burnt offering, it's unacceptable. Again, I'm going to read that one more time because I lost my train of thought as I was reading. So when malika was performed on a sin offering of a fowl, okay, on the lower half of the altar, in a manner as it should be performed for a burnt offering for the sake of a sin offering. I'm going to read this in Hebrew, I'm getting confused. Chatas ha'oif shemelaka lemata, k'manikas oila l'shem chatas. Okay, so the bird was a sin offering, and you did the malika below, which is correct, but you did the malika like the oila, but you did it for the purpose of a chatas, or kamas chatas l'shem oila, or you did it the way you're supposed to do it for a sin offering, but your intention was for a burnt offering. Or kamas oila l'shem oila, or you did it was a sin offering, remember, but you did the whole performance, both the way you did it and what your intention was the oila. In all of these cases, it's invalid. And the whole thing has to be in sync. What the animal was designated for, and each step of the process. Each step of the process meaning where on the mizbeach it's done, and what your intention was. We're going to see this is going to be different when it comes to a bird that's an olah. Okay, because when you deal with a bird that's a sin offering, even if you did everything as it should have been done, but you had the wrong intention, it invalidates it. Okay, but when he says, "V'chein oila so'ib," similarly, when a burnt offering of a fowl was presented on the upper half of the altar, in the manner as it should be performed for a sin offering, but you did it for the sake of a burnt offering, or as it should be performed for a sin offering for the sake of a sin offering, it's unacceptable. Okay, if however, because again, you're doing everything like it should be for a sin offering, but this was originally a burnt offering. However, if he performs it as it should be performed for a burnt offering, for the sake of a sin offering, it is acceptable. Now, as if he did, if it was originally a burnt offering, and he did everything right of how a sin offering, a burnt offering should be brought. The only thing that was missing was that in his mind, he was thinking sin offering. He says it's still acceptable. Because when it comes to an oila, the intention doesn't affect. It's not considered lo lishma, does not invalidate it. But it is not considered as if the owner fulfilled his obligation. So although it's not invalid, meaning you can process that korban, but the owner who was required to bring an olah has now just brought the olah, but because the whole process was done, even though the process was done correctly, but the intention was for a sin offering, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation. Okay, so again, the difference between halacha 7 and 8 is that by halacha 7, so it's originally a burnt offering. You did the whole process as a burnt offering should be done, but you intended it to be, as a burnt offering should be done, but you intended it to be a sin offering, but you intended it to be a burnt offering, that invalidates it. But if it was originally a burnt offering, and you did everything as it should be done, just your intention was a sin offering, it doesn't invalidate it, in the sense that you can continue processing that bird on the altar. But what is missing is that the person who you bring it on their behalf has not fulfilled the obligation. So they would have to bring another korban. Halacha 9, all of these fowl that are disqualified because of the place on the altar where the blood was presented, because of the difference in the manner in which Melika is performed, or the intent for which they are offered, are not considered as a fowl that has become an aveda with regard to the laws of ritual impurity. So going back to the earlier halacha. Similarly, when a sin offering or burnt offering of fowl becomes pigul, so we'll learn about that. If you had the wrong intended for the wrong step in the process, or became impure, or became noiser, but this is all after it was processed. It does not cause impurity in one's gut, as does a fowl that has become an avela. Why? So all of these become disqualified after having entered the temple courtyard. And as we said, the rule in the first or the second halacha, that if it becomes invalidated or disqualified because of what happens after it's in the temple courtyard, it's invalid, but it's not an avela. It doesn't have that impurity. Halacha 10, when a sin offering of a fowl is brought because of a doubt, it should be offered as required, but not eaten. Okay, instead it should be burnt like all other sacrificial animals that become disqualified. What's an example of a doubt? A doubt is like, let's see if he's got examples here. A doubt would be that a woman who, for example, I think is a woman has to bring after she's completed her time after birth. She has to bring an olah and a chatat. But what happens if perhaps she's not certain if the child survived or something like that? So she's got to bring a chatas, but it's a doubt of whether she actually has to bring it. So then he says you bring the offering, but you don't eat it. When is such a sacrifice brought because of a doubt? Oh, so he gives examples. When there's an unresolved question whether a woman is a zava. Zava was when she bleeds consecutively, not in the time of her menstrual cycle, or impure because of a childbirth or the like. So he says there is no concept of an animal being brought as a sin offering because of a doubt. Because if a person is unsure whether or not he committed a sin, he should bring a conditional guilt offering. When it comes to a chatas offering that requires an animal, but there's a doubt, there's an alternative type of sacrifice to be brought. Not so with a bird. And therefore he says you would bring it, but you don't eat it. That will be explained in Hilchot Shkarot, where a person made a mistake. So he's just adding a proviso. This is only a scenario that happens with a bird offering, not with an animal offering. Halacha 11. The following rule applies when a sin offering of a fowl is brought because of a doubt. So now you're bringing it. Remember, what you would be doing is you bring it, but you wouldn't eat it, even though usually the chatas offering is eaten. But what happens if when you started the process, there was a doubt? She wasn't sure if she's a zava, so she's got to bring it. And then it's discovered that the woman is definitely obligated to bring it. Find out that, yes, we clarify that she was a zava, she's required to bring this korban. So what do you do now? So if she realized this before Malika was performed on the dove, it should be offered with certainty and eaten. So if the Malika wasn't done, even though when she brought the animal, the bird to the temple, the intention was then you're going to go through the process of offering by not eating it. But so long as the Malika hasn't been done, you can just process it as usual and she would eat it. But if she did not discover this until after the mikvah was performed, the sprinkling and the presentation of his blood on the altar should be completed. You complete the process, but then it should be burned. She doesn't eat it. Why not? So that it will not be said that a sin offering or a fowl brought because of a doubt is eating. Because if you tell her to eat it, even though now for herself she knows that, yes, she was required to bring it, she can't eat it now once the whole processing went through, once the malika was done, when there was uncertainty, because it's going to look like a korban that's brought with uncertainty, this bird of a chattas brought with uncertainty would be eaten. We don't want to create that doubt. For at the outset, this offering is brought because of a doubt, and we don't want to conclude it as if it was that it's eaten, because observers will assume that that's what's usually done. If after manika was performed, she discovered that she was not obligated, so that's the alternative. What if she was a doubt? Now she finds out she wasn't obligated to bring the sacrifice. What do you do with that bird? It cannot be burnt on the altar because it wasn't required. So what do? It should be buried. It's buried. And he doesn't mention what happens if you find out that she wasn't obligated before malika, presumably because that particular bird would just be redesignated as a regular chol, a mundane bird. It has no sanctity because there was no actual obligation. Okay, let's see if we can get this. There were one or two mind benders there, keeping track of the different things that we have to make sure are on target when it comes to bringing these bird sacrifices. So first question, of a priest performed malika on a dove that is later discovered to be a treifa. Is the dove considered a nevela? Remember, nevela means that it's impure.
I think not.
We're going to go with not. Sorry, mix that one. You perform. I'm actually confused. I thought it was. Okay, I'm going to have to go back to that. Isn't it? Because intrinsically, didn't we say intrinsically it's unfit? Do you have a minute? We got a minute. Ooh, where's it taking us? Thought it was going to take us back up the page. When perform malika, an animal is discovered to be a treifa, he performs the malika with a knife, or considered outside that they are considered as nevela. Yeah, they are considered as a nevela in all contexts. Did I misread the question? Let's read the question again. If a priest perform malika on a dove that is later discovered to be a treifa, is the dove considered a nevela? What am I missing? Does halacha 5 not say that it is an nevela? No, halacha 5. He says, for this reason, when a person performs malika and the animal is discovered to be a treifa, right? Or he performed malika with a knife, or performed malika on an ordinary dove in the temple courtyard, or considered dove outside the courtyard, they are considered as nevela in all contexts. Oh, maybe it's different because you're talking about a non-kohen. No.
Maybe it's the first paragraph. Number 1.
If I perform malika on a turtle dove before they reach the appropriate age, unless this is talking about a non-kohen, they are considered as nevela in all contexts. I'm confused. I don't know if I'm misunderstanding something or this is a mistake. I don't know. Is the dove considered a nevela? The way I'm reading halacha 3 there is that yes, the dove is considered a nevela. Okay, I don't know. Someone have to check that. The blood from a burnt offering of a fowl is presented on. Okay, so burnt offering. Where's the burnt offering?
In the upper half.
Upper.
Yeah, correct. Okay, it's kind of easy to remember because Ola is raised up. You can think about the upper part of the mizbeach. A nice way to remember that. 3, if a sin offering of a fowl is being brought because of a doubt, and then it is discovered that the person was obligated to bring it, what should be done? So we said, if they realize before the manikah was done, it is only offered but not eaten. If they realize before the manikah was done, it is offered and eaten. So again, you found out before the manikah was done.
Phew.
Yes, then it's eaten, right? You go ahead as even though when you brought originally it wasn't intention, but because the whole process is done with that knowledge, you go ahead and you eat it. If after manikah was performed on a fowl, one discovered that he was not obligated to bring a sacrifice, what should be done? So he said it should buried, because buried it can't get burned because that was set specific for those things that are allowed onto the altar. That would have been allowed on the altar, but this never would have been. So there you go. Okay. So either we misunderstood something about the question, or the halacha, or the mistake is in the question over there. But otherwise, I think we did okay.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Yeah, shikar.
Thank you.
Missing some of the regulars, but good to have you guys. And Freilich and
Thank
Chanukah.
you. Hanukkah.
Okay.